Did you watch the premiere of Acolyte?
Ro, I was like, oh my gosh, it's her.
In your mind, who are the better tacticians, the Vong or the New Alliance?
100% the New Alliance.
But how do you think the war would have turned out if both of the spy networks were severely compromised?
Our heroes don't know their technology.
Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. We are finally here. Our epic journey of the New Jedi Order is coming to an end. I'm here with lovely Meg, and we're here for part one. We're actually going to split this book into two. But before we begin, Meg, it's very pleasing to have you back. I loved all these conversations we had. I can't wait. I'm so excited for us to go into our next series discussion with the Legacy. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Tell us, how is everything on your end? What's going on with your channel, in your life? What's interesting?
Yeah, well, it's summer, which down here means it's been hot, very hot. The other day I was in the car and my car thermometer was saying it was 100 degrees on the road. So I was like, oh
wow.
boy. I'm continuing to read through, I think this year is sort of like the post Revenge of the Sith books that came out. So been reading the Darth Bane trilogy for the first time. And
Oh, nice.
my newest one coming out will be a review of the first book in the Coruscant Nights trilogy, which was another one that I'd never read before.
You know that it's really crazy. Like, you and I, we've both been fans of the expanded universe for so many years, and there's still so much to get to, which I would assume, guys, it's not probably a big surprise. You look at Meg's shelves behind her, right? There's probably so many books you read in between, right? You read your Star Wars book, then you want to move on to something else, back and forth to keep it interesting. And so your exhaustion doesn't hit with Star Wars. You want to play it up against other things. Very quick reminder to everyone who is, maybe you're joining us for the first time, maybe you've been on this journey with us, but what is the New Jedi Order? It's basically a part of Star Wars Legends books before the 2014, before Disney purchased the franchise in 2012. And in 14, they announced like, okay, this is going to be branded as Legends now. That's what we're discussing here. And the books were published all the way from 1999 all the way to 2003. And they feature 19 adult novels and some comic books as well. And the events in the New Jedi Order cover from 21 to 25 years after the Battle of Yavin, right? Or after Episode 4, where Luke Skywalker is reestablishing the New Jedi Order, and we're experiencing this epic war of intergalactic invasion from Yuuzhan Vong. Meg, I quickly want to cover where you and I left off with our previous podcast, right? Let's remind quickly the audience where we are, and we're going to continue with this book here. So we left off with book number 18, which is pre-final book, which was called The Final Prophecy by Greg Keyes and was released in September of 2003. And we ended our story on the Yuuzhan Vong spy Nomanor evading capture yet again. He is just this slippery guy that you and I love to hate. Meanwhile, Luke Skywalker and his allies, they rescue Tahir Vela and Corran Horn. Now, the living planet Zenoma Sekot rids itself from Anor's sabotage, and it shoots off into space, heading towards its final destination, the conquered planet of Coruscant. Now here today, once again, reminder guys, we're discussing the first part of this epic, very large book, which is supposed to close off so many things and resolve so many characters. This is book 19, The Unifying Force, by one of my very favorite Star Wars authors, James Luceno. And this one came out in November 4th of 2003. Now, here we go, part one. But once again, I got to slip something in there. Before we start, I forgot to ask, did you watch the premiere of Acolyte? How is it? Like, did you like it? Where you stand with it?
Yeah, so I watched the first 2 episodes. I like that it's a story that is not connected to the prequels or the original trilogy in any way. I sort of wondered, like, because I've fallen off the wagon of the High Republic, it was just like so much content that I wasn't up to date. But watching the first 2 episodes, I'm like, I don't think you really need to have read the High Republic books. Although if you have, and then I think it was in the second episode when you see Vernestra Rowe, I was like, oh my gosh, it's her.
And the reason I'm asking you is because it's such a huge contrast from the New Jedi Order, which deals with these larger-than-life characters that we all come and love, not only from the films themselves, but they have stayed were created in the expanded universe, stayed throughout so many books, and you're dealing with very familiar elements, and obviously the audience comes in with a lot of expectations. And I thought it would be an interesting question to ask, because the Acolyte show is based on the High Republic, which is not based on anything we've seen before. Your only expectation comes from reading the books and the comic books, and not even that, because even within the span of the High Republic, it takes place, like almost 80 years before the prequels? So it's right there on the tip of the modern Star Wars. Anyway, let's go. Part 1. We open up the story with a Millennium Falcon that rescues one of the Salvaris prisoners of war. Now, this Bith was one of the 3 to memorize a mathematical code which is vital to the war effort. And Galactic Alliance decoders, they discover that the prisoners on Salvaris are due to a public sacrifice on Yuuzhan Tar. A quick reminder, Yuuzhan Tar is the rebranded, renamed Coruscant, which is colonized by these invaders. Now, the decision is made to save all the prisoners and rally Captain Jodor Page and Major Pashkraken troops against the invaders. Now, the rescue attempts set off a battle as the several prisoners are shipped off. Millennium Falcon is greatly damaged by the Vong specialized ship, and hyperspace jumps into Kalkula system, where they request repairs from an orbital station, while discovering that the planet is assailed by the Vong for several weeks because they disabled the holonet reception to the rest of the galaxy, which we also see that the Yuuzhan Vong are adapting. Is that the Yuuzhan Vong invader over there?
I have someone has invaded my space.
What's her name? I love it.
Her name is Sammy.
Sammy is going to participate in our Yuuzhan Vong chapter story. But Meg, the first question I had for you is, there are a lot of, we've discussed this before, and I know I threw this question at you before, but I think it would be relevant for this book as well. There's a lot of espionage and covert tactics from both sides of the war. How did the series handle it in general?
I think pretty well, because I think what New Jedi Order has shown that, like, it's not just, I mean, this is why the Yuuzhan Vong are failing. They have basically all these warriors, but if you don't have the information to back them up and like the strategies in place, you're just going to fail. So I really like the espionage stuff in the New Jedi Order, because I think it shows how important it is, like, overall. Like, yeah, battles are important, but also like knowing what's going on and knowing how to counter things is even more important.
Yeah. And it's really fascinating because the Yuuzhan Vong are these very different kind of species, right? If you have other like Twi'leks or I don't know, Zabrak, they're kind of humanoid, right? Culturally they might be different, but you still sort of associate with them. And obviously the New Jedi Order's huge focus was on these completely different aliens, but the whole alien and disgusting at times cultural values are very hell-bent on, like just subjugating everyone on their way. But it's still interesting that as warlike people as they are, they still have to rely on intelligence. I'm like, okay, that's cool. I guess that's a universal cross-galactic constant part of war, which you're supposed to excel at. Which leads me to my next question. In your mind, who are the better tacticians, the Vong or the New Alliance?
Oh, 100% the New Alliance. I mean, they had some issues. They had a lot of infighting, but I feel like at this point, especially by the end, we've seen some very good tacticians from the Yuuzhan Vong, but they're all dead.
Yeah.
And, we've still got like Admiral Akbar and all them hanging on somehow. So I think even though the Galactic Alliance really started off on the wrong foot, by the time we've come, 5 years into the war, it's clear that they, at this point in time, have the better strategists.
Right. The feeling that I had when the Vong arrive at this our galaxy, they are already way past their prime. Yeah. They are already rotting from inside. And I think you and I, we've discussed this in previous podcasts, where their war machine and their spy network isn't where it's supposed to be. And that's where you are correct. But it keeps me wondering, what if they came in full strong at the height of their power?
Oh
Holy
gosh.
bejesus, like we would be in trouble, dude. This would be
Yeah.
like 28 book series because there would be a lot of more effort on the New Alliance's behalf to combat these guys because they're just brutal warriors.
Yeah.
But how do you think the war would have turned out if both of the spy networks were severely compromised?
I think it's interesting because the Voln have the advantage over like brute force and also, especially in the beginning, just like unfamiliarity. Like our heroes don't know their technology, don't know how to counter it. And so I think that like if the Galactic Alliance side hadn't had such good intelligence and stuff,
Yeah.
I don't think they would have been able to build up to the position that they have by the point of the beginning of the unifying force. Like
Mm.
so much of why they're winning at this point is because they've figured out like how to counter, the Voln's biotech and stuff like that. So I think it would have been a much longer, even bloodier war.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one thing I've noticed if you invested time into reading expanded books before the New Jedi Order, you see through the eyes of characters like Lando Calrissian and Leia Organa and Mon Mothma and even Admiral Akbar. There's just so much bureaucracy going on there and so much
Yeah.
pencil pushing and paperwork and this or that. And it really, the galaxy doesn't feel unified. Now you pit bureaucracy versus religious zeal that the Vong bring. And there's so much vitality and energy as far as conquests go. Like, I honestly feel that the New Alliance would not have a chance. Take away the spy networks from each party, I think it's just the Vong would have steamrolled through all of it. Jedi or no Jedi. They just
Yeah.
would have no chance. Moving on with the story, now the Falcon gets much needed repairs. It loads the prisoners and leaves back to the Galactic Alliance space. It leaves behind Pashkraken to keep fighting the Vong. Han, Leia, Kib Duran, and their accomplices arrive back on the planet disguised as scientists. They return back to this planet. They want to observe a rare natural phenomenon called the Nocturne of the Winged Stars. Obviously with permission of the Yuzong Vong. Maybe they are somebody who still revere natural phenomena. We know they're very anti-technology, but they still are worship kind of like natural phenomenons. So our heroes link up with other spies, Farrar and Sasso, to destroy the planet's Yamosk. And Yamosk are these war coordinators that we've discussed in a previous podcast. They're basically Yuzong Vong weapons of war. And the team is discovered by the Vong patrols. Han and Leia are captured and are scheduled for execution. When Lando Calrissian, Talon Carter, and Shada Dukhal arrive to rescue their friends, they discover a shocking truth. All of the, or majority of the invading forces, including their commander Karr, and artificially grown biots die from this Alpha-Red bioweapon, which was engineered by the Chiss biotechnicians, which could potentially lead to a greater catastrophe and the death of other sentient beings across the galaxy.
Yeah.
Question is, we see a battle of wits and spy networks alongside traditional warfare. Do you like this shift back and forth, going from this traditional war and major action scenes back to espionage?
I think so because I feel like it breaks it up a little because sometimes when you're reading like, the space battle scenes, you're just like, I can't visualize. There's just so much and it's so foreign that like I can't visualize what it looks like. So like I appreciate when you go back and forth between things that, at times I'm like, wait, slow down. I like have to picture this in my head to like, the more like spy movie stuff because it gives you a break and sort of like, your tension and then tension released and raised. And like, I feel like it's a nice way to structure things.
Yeah, I think that's the word you said there, tension. I feel that, as a kid growing up in the 80s watching all these movies, which the standard back in the day for general adventure action movie was an hour and a half. Majority of films went into that time frame. And you always built to your action. You always built momentum. That's what made all the action more fun and more rewarding. And that's what I feel what James Luceno is doing. His other narrative qualities as an author, I'll discuss a little bit later in this podcast. But I feel that he knows how to set things up.
Yeah.
And when it's a time comes for, okay, we did our tactical part, we did all the thinking and brainstorming. Now it's time for all hell to break loose. Now you start worrying for your characters. Like, oh my God, who's going to survive? Who's going to live or die? How are the supporting characters such as Lando Calrissian, Talon Karrde, Tahiri Vela, or anyone else you care to mention, how are they handled in this book series for you?
I think Unifying Force basically has, key mission. It wants to conclude everything. So we can't have those like little moments with characters that we are able to have in individual books because there's just no dang time here. There's no
Yeah.
time. There's too much to do. But I feel like even without having those like little like character moments, I still feel like when I see them here, they feel like themselves. So I feel like James Luceno gets them, even if they don't have like he can't dedicate a lot of the book to
Right.
them, but it's still like every time you see one, you're like, oh, there's Card, and he's just like Card.
Yeah. And the distinction I would make, like I was a big fan of the Light of the Jedi book, but I think a lot of the criticism was fair because it was the first book in this mega huge new enterprise from Del Rey and Lucasfilm that you weren't invested with a lot of these characters, but you understood what the story was trying to do. So logically it made sense, but the reward wasn't quite there yet. You had to stick on with this series to start learning all about these characters. Here, it's in reverse, where James Luceno trusts that you've been a fan of the New Jedi Order, and both you and him know who these characters are. So like you said, even though it's a very voluminous story, it's a huge book, he, in a way, decentralizes most of the characters, including big ones like Luke, Jacen Solo. He's like, hey guys, this is not the book where you have your moment to shine. I have to put all of these movies. It's almost, think of an analogy I would make as like an RTS game. Instead of like something, an RPG like Final Fantasy of Zelda, where it's one or four, a group of central characters, it's an RTS. It's a whole army, and you're supposed to know what's where, but it's still very effective because he's leading this torrent of storytelling forward, and he's saying, here is going to be your rising conclusion at the end.
Yeah.
Did you get a premonition that the Galactic Alliance will have to sacrifice a lot to score the ultimate victory?
I had a bit of that where you see the consequences of the alpha red toxin and you go, oh, would they go there? Like, because clearly they're testing it. And that was the kind of thing where, you want victory, but at what cost? So when you see what cost, you're like, okay. I don't know about this. I want them to defeat the Valm, but like genocide.
Right.
And not just that, but the fact that they don't know who else would die from this toxin. Like, yeah, they know now it will kill all the Yuuzhan Vong and all their biotech, but like, what else?
And I love how Luceno circles back to the first book in the series, right? And he pays attention to what was done there, and all of the philosophical talking and debating pouring forth, and Luke's inaction that frustrated you personally, now it's coming full force. There was a reason for that. All of that stuff is like, are we going to lose our humanity in deploying this bioweapon and destroy a whole swath of a species, even though they are these warring people that want to destroy us? Are we like them? It's a very, very World War II kind of thing. Like, are we going to punish that entire race of people, an entire country, for what their leader was doing? It's a very, very hard moral question. Moving on, now our heroes struggle with this moral dilemma of committing genocide if they exterminate all the Yuuzhan Vong with this bioweapon. A Vong ship takes takes off to Kaluka planet to report back to Coruscant. Meanwhile, the battle against the invading armada over homeworld of Mon Calamari is in full swing. Jaina Solo is nearly killed. She loses her astromech droid Cappy, while the fleet is nearly overwhelmed by the Yuuzhan Vong. This is the final novel in the series. Reading it chapter by chapter, do you ever feel like the sense of mounting tension?
Yeah. I feel like Lucena did that pretty well because it's like that battle on Mon Calamari, and you're like, well, they wouldn't lose, right? But you keep turning the pages, you're like, they're not gonna lose, right? But you don't know because it's not going well.
Because the expectation is like, hey, this is Star Wars. The good guys are gonna win at the end. We know it's the last book. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Come on, let's start winning, right? Let's start winning this thing. But did the stakes in the book feel appropriate for the conclusion of a long running series for you?
I think so because I mean it's the last book, so we know that the Yuuzhan somehow is going to get wrapped up.
Mhm.
But it's like they're pushing so, the Galactic Alliance has regained so much of what they lost that the Yuuzhan are starting to get really desperate.
Yeah.
So it felt accurate to me that like they would throw everything they have into a battle because they're not good strategists. And they were like, oh, well, and you're like, using Vaughn, that's a dumb idea. But when you're reading the book, you're just like so concerned for everyone.
Yeah. In terms of tension, obviously it's been, elevating since last couple of books before we get here. But I almost feel like a comparison would be in this final book to listening to a symphony and James Luceno being this orchestra conductor. And he's like, and I'm going to, he's punctuating story beats here. And there's Mon Calamari battle here. And you're reading and you can't believe, like, honestly, are we going to sacrifice this planet? We're never going to encounter Mon Calamari in Star Wars ever again. It really felt, honestly, you felt terrified, you felt scared. And for the first time in Star Wars, obviously, big thing, right? We lost Chewie in the beginning of this series.
Yeah.
You felt like nobody's safe.
Mm-mm.
Part 2. Again, this is a massive book, guys. We're going to cover first 2 parts here, and then we're going to leave the last 2 because I was also late to this podcast, and Meg was very, very gracious to stay on, and we do this thing so we don't postpone it. But anyway, part 2. Now, the living planet Xenoma Sicard is traveling in hyperspace to its final destination. Luke Skywalker, Mara Jade, Jason, Tahiri Vela, Corran Horn, and others take refuge in the planet's cavern system. Now, the High Priest Harar, he completely loses faith in his religion after learning that his species is closely connected to Xenoma Sicard. Now, the sentient planet speaks through possessed Magister Jabitha Hall, addressing all of the heroes, and explains the original Yuuzhan Tar from outside of this galaxy, the original homeworld, was stripped of its native Yuuzhan Vong connection to the Force. It completely severed their sense in the Force. That's why the Jedi couldn't identify them.
Yeah.
And because its inhabitants were becoming a violent race craving war, brutality, and harboring hate for technology, this event caused the aliens terrible pain, turning their religious beliefs into the self-mutilating death cult. Big narratives bombs are dropped here.
Yeah.
How did this new information change your outlook on the Yuuzhan Vong?
I don't know if it changed like what I thought of them, but it sort of made sense because, there'd been a lot of, especially in the previous book, in the Final Prophecy, you're like, there's some connection between the Yuuzhan Vong and Zonama Seacoat. And you're like, so I think finally getting an explanation for like why the Jedi can't sense them in the Force. And then it's not like an out of the blue explanation. It's something that, has very, very rarely happened. But we saw Ulic Qel-Droma in the Tales of the Jedi series. He was stripped of his ability to touch the Force. So it's like this is on a way massive scale that their planet, stripped it from everyone. But it was the kind of thing where I'm like, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And then you're like, oh, so Zonama Seacoat's going to be even more important than we previously thought. I mean, it was already very important. It was this weird, like, sentient planet that has hyperdrive engines that can go anywhere. But now you're like, this is the key. This will somehow, like the ending with the Yuuzhan Vong, it's going to involve Zonama Seacoat. Like, I know it because they're connected.
Yeah. I honestly felt empathy because how does the phrase go? The road to hell is built with good intentions, something along the lines. I'm forgetting the exact phrase, but the idea is that at some point perhaps there were a noble race of people, and because of this event, because we're maybe some key leaders of that nation were leading the society spiraling down, that all had to pay the sacrifice, all had to become this very brutalizing society of people. And I sort of felt for them after this information was dropped. But how zany is a living planet talking to people and reciting historical events? Did you feel it was appropriate for a Star Wars kind of a genre?
I mean, Star Wars has always had some sort of uh goofy, very esoteric stuff. So it's sort of like when we were first introduced to Zonomasi Coat, I was like, all right, I'm just gonna have to buy this. You're gonna have to buy the concept of this like sentient planet. And then you're like, I mean, I guess so. We had Waru from another dimension, so I guess we
Yeah.
could have it strains my suspension of disbelief a little bit. I sort of have to like, stuff it in a trunk and sit on it and be like, don't think about that. Don't think about that.
See, now, Meg, it's very interesting to compare notes and feelings on these stories, because I'm realizing the more years pass by, the more I realize how lenient I am. Because I sometimes I appear outwardly very critical. I'm very critical of a lot of new Star Wars. That's clearly the truth. But I was also a lot more lenient back then. Maybe it had to do something with having less and being more appreciative of it. But when the what's the Zenoma called a planet, the Rogue Planet book came out, my reaction to it was, I know yours, I know a lot of my friends, but I was like, a living planet? Such. Yeah. I was suckered in so easily. I was like, I don't care. It's fantasy, it's space, it's Star Wars. Like, let's go. Yeah. It just felt natural to me. Further revelations speak of the Kremlevian War and the Devong waged on their own galaxy, this expansionist regime, forcing them into new intergalactic conquest. Jacen Solo is troubled with a vision that tells him to stand firm. And he also recalls this dream of failing to capture the lightsaber that Luke Skywalker throws to him, making the Yuzong Vaughn, the young man, basically question what his further actions will be. What's his role in this war? Talk about the interplay of the Jedi and their visions in this war. What is their purpose, and what does it say of the Jedi Order?
Yeah. Well, they've definitely struggled with this from the beginning, that there were, the faction that was like immediately like, fight them and kill them. And then Luke, who was like, wait and see, let's figure this out. And then I feel like Jacen, who more than anything, has had visions of, him freeing slaves, that vision of him trying to stand firm. And like that first vision, which he had early on in the books, and he was like, oh, it's a vision of the future. That's what I need to do. And he tried to do that and he failed.
He had that conviction. Yeah.
So I think so much of it is being like trying to trust the will of the Force, but then also realizing like the Force is not going to literally tell you what to do. And so I think especially Jacen has taken it to like very big extremes and trying to figure out like, what's my role? What should I play? And I think, we'll definitely see it more in the second half of the book, but it's almost like, the Force is like, hey, you're not going to have visions of the future. That's exactly what you need to do. Mm-hmm. But you will know like when you need to act. Mm-hmm. And where, and just be like receptive, which even now, even in the last book, Jacen is still struggling with at times.
Yeah. And I felt it made the Force more nuanced without this just pseudo intellectualism of pseudo, philosophy of like, the gray moral area between good and evil. No, we know what good and evil is in Star Wars. It's clear. George Lucas outlined it. And whether through accident or intentional, now this book came out in 2003. We already got 2 out of the 3 prequels. Yeah. And we see a very specific Jedi Order that is clearly failing, right? Because they're in their dogmas and they're not willing to listen to guys like Qui-Gon Jinn, who is trying to alert them to this new development. They're like, whatever. We got the chosen one. Here, what's happening is the Jedi are a lot more attuned to the Force. They're a lot more sensitive. What frustrated you about Luke, I felt was like, okay, I see where he's coming from. He's groping in the dark. He's sensing this new threat. He obviously wants to do something, but he's not jumping. He's not being impulsive about it. And I felt it was very, very well handled. Moving on. Now our friend Nomanor, he's welcomed back to his people by Supreme Overlord Shimra with a promotion. But his competitor High Priest Drathul plans to manipulate Nomanor into becoming a fellow Quo-Realist. And a Quo-Realist is this yet again new faction within the disgruntled Yuuzhan Vong who have this anti-invasion sentiment. Yeah. In the old days, this is how it was supposed to be, that sort of thing. However, the fruits from Nomanor's labors flourish, and his Jedi heresy influence over the Shamed Ones grows stronger. Nomanor's co-conspirators, including the shamed warrior Khunra, break up the ritual sacrifice of the Alliance prisoners, saving many in the process, including Major Kraken.
Yeah.
This upset of power creates a rift among Shimra's ranks, sowing more divide in the Yuuzhan Vong society. The Supreme Leader begins to gradually lose control over his people and even the planet's world brain. His last line of defense are his royal guards of the Slayers, these genetically modified soldiers specialized in killing the Jedi. Were you anticipating a direct clash between Nomanor and his Supreme Leader?
I wasn't sure if I was expecting it at first because, like, with Nomanor, there's always that underlying current of, like, how can I use this to get back in Shimra's good graces? Like, even when he's starting to recognize the truth, he's still like, he never completely gets there. He's just still like, oh, well, this will help me progress politically. So I felt like it was probably going to come to a head because the little bit we've seen of Shimra, you're like, there's something off with this dude. Like, something is not right. So I figured that Nomanor was going to have a complete break at some point. I just didn't know when it was going to come because, you know, every time I thought, oh, he's going to turn over a new leaf, he's going to realize that, like, no. And then he goes right back to sniveling. So
yeah. I always believed that Nomanor had this mean streak on him. His job is to dodge and weave and outsmart you, but when the push comes to shove, and he will always escape. That's kind of speaks of a smart tactic if you're a spy. But he's a little bit of badass in him too. I was sort of anticipating that because even from the earlier books, something was telling me is like, this guy has illusions of grandeur. He's almost like, what's this dude, Serial from the Andor show? People take him for this complete dolt, that's like this idiot who fails everywhere. But I'm like, hold on a second. Stop. Let's not judge this dude. There's some kind of foundation in him that he's being manipulated. Sometimes he's being called a fool. Even this the Imperial Intelligence woman, what's her face? I keep forgetting her.
Oh, Vicky Sesh.
Yeah. No. From the Andor.
Oh, the blonde one.
Yeah, whatever her name is, you know what I'm talking about.
Whatever her name, the blonde
one.
Right,
but even she's like sort of discards him, but then she says there's some potential in him. Yeah. I personally felt like there's more than meets the eye, and same with Nomanor. I'm like, don't discard this guy just yet. No. And when we got to this final book, I'm like, he's gonna try to like take all of this over. What? All right, let's see where this goes. This is pretty interesting. And we talked about politics in New Jedi Order, but how important was it, especially in relationship to Nomanor and Overlord Shimra in this final book?
I think so much of like what we saw with Shimra was like just hints of like behind the scenes. Like, you know, we'd see a little glimpse of him because it was like the way that the New Jedi Order built up. Like, you know, first we saw the warriors and then we saw the priests and then we saw the shapers and just sort of like, and then the shamed ones. So it was like by the time we get to the final book, it's like, oh, now we see Shimra in his court and we see like, this ain't working.
Yeah.
This is not, I mean, it's sort of like a symptom of like, yeah, the rot starts at the very top for the Yuuzhan Vong. And you're like, sure, they've taken Coruscant, they made it their new homeworld, but like they're losing.
Yeah.
And their political it's messed up.
I thought it was so vital to the story because at this point you realize that no matter how powerful your war machine is, if you don't have the faith of your people, if you don't have the motivation for them to fight, you're done, bro. And
Yeah.
here he's completely, Shimra is unraveling. He's losing grasp of everything, of his most trusted allies, because they no longer believe him. It's almost like the last months of the World War II, where even Hitler's like closest allies were saying he's incapable of making decision. He's lost it, man. That's it. We're
Yeah.
done for. I'm going to jump just a little bit forward here and cheat, even though we're just discussing the first two parts. Taking the book as a whole, when the story was over, do you feel like the book resolved the major plot points set up by the previous books?
I think so. I think for the most part, like there were a few things left hanging, but really like so many things were concluded that I never thought would be concluded. I think there's an interview, it's in the hardcover book
Mhm.
of the Unifying Force. There's like a CD in the back. Interview with James Luceno and some others. And he said when he finished his first draft of the Unifying Force and turned it in, and they turned it back to him, and they gave him a 3-page document that was just like bullet points of every single plot line from the series that he needed to sum up in
Oh,
the book.
wow.
So I was like, I feel like more so than any of the other like series ender books in Star Wars, like Unifying Force really like concludes almost everything
But you
in a
said
really
that.
satisfying way.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. But you also mentioned a few things because I'm trying to recollect them and I honestly can't. Were there a couple of things that you wish were also included that weren't?
Well, I guess I had wondered, what happened to what's his face? From Star by Star, Raynar. Like what happened to
Raynar. Mhm.
Raynar? Although that did get covered in the Dark Nest trilogy. So that was one thing we're reading the books. I'm like, but what about Raynar? Like, what about um but I feel like, yeah, other than that loose end, almost everything I feel like was tied up.
Yeah. Speaking of War, oh my God. Like you finished the trilogy, right? You read
I
it.
did, yeah.
Oh my God. What a way to reuse a known character. I was devastated. Maybe it's something also that is one of my, it's the trilogy that doesn't get talked enough, honestly. One of them I always bring up, the Black Fleet Crisis. I love it. The Carillion trilogy. I'm like, bro, the Swarm War trilogy is one of my favorites. It is so good. I generally don't swing with space bugs. I am a fan of Starship Troopers, but for some reason, if you're gonna give me Yuzong Vong over bugs, I'm always gonna go with Yuzong Vong.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
here it was just so fascinating, so refreshing. I'm like, and Rain are like, oh, you're doing this to my boy. Look how you destroyed. Oh my God, it was awesome.
I'm not a space bug person, so yeah, the whole time reading the Dark Nest books, I'm like, oh,
But did you enjoy it though? Did you like the trilogy?
well, I just can't get over the beetles and letting them crawl in your clothing.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. Pretty intense. I think later series like Legacy were being kind of judged by some fandom to be too dark and too brutal, even by me. I'm like, okay, I'm still buying the story. It's still awesome. Like, man, are we still in the Star Wars territory? This is pretty brutal stuff. It almost feels like dystopian, authoritarian, kind of like sci-fi or something.
Yeah.
Moving on. Our living planet, Xenoma Sicot, exits hyperspace at Coruscant's orbit right on time. It plays into Nomanor's false final prophecy. It forces the Vong forces to retreat from the winning battle at Mon Calamari. And it incites the Shane One's open demonstrations against their oppressors. Overlord Shimla loses his screws and his capacity to make decisions. In his feat of insanity, he declares a war on all the Yuzang Vong gods. It's his last desperate attempt to rein in his still loyal followers. This book tackles the delicate balance between political machinations and social control through religious authority. Can you see any modern parallels in our own history?
I mean, obviously, we've had so many wars fought over religion and
Hmm.
even like religions fighting religions. So I think, you know, Shimra as a last ditch attempt trying to like invoke the gods even into it, you're like, oh, he's really stretching here.
Yeah. I felt that there's a huge parallel between that story and the Crusades. I'm currently watching a
Yeah.
three-part documentary. I'm fascinated with that time period. It's because it was so formative in the future political relationships. I mean, what's going on in the Middle East today is a direct cause of what happened during the Crusade times, of
Yeah.
people and xenophobia and not willing to accept each other based what I have a cross, you have a star, that kind of thing. It's or you know, moon crescent. It's like it's just crazy, crazy, powerful ideas taking sway of otherwise intelligent people that gave people. I'm not just talking about one culture. I'm talking about all of us as humanity, right?
Yeah.
People that bestow upon the world science and literature and poetry and so much goodness that they bring, they can also be converted into people who see nothing but red. Like, oh, you're not like us? Let's
Yeah.
go. And just you just start hacking away at people. And that's what we see basing in this book. It's a crusade coming to its end.
Yeah.
Which part of the story felt like the beginning of the end?
Think for me, because it's sort of like the one we haven't talked about yet, the third part, because it felt like part one and two was like building, building, building,
Go
building.
into it.
And then part three is like huge climax. And
Yeah.
and you're turning the page and you're like, oh my gosh, what is gonna happen next?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Do you think the Yuzong Wang losing the war was completely inevitable?
um, no, because I think here's the thing. I do think the Yuzabog could have easily railroaded them, like right at the
Yeah.
beginning when, they had no information about them. They had no idea about their potential and their technology. They could have just like gone right through. But I feel like once number one, I think that Savon Law, like declaring war against all the Jedi, yeah, they did kill a lot of Jedi,
Yeah.
but that ended up really biting them in the butt. Um,
How so? What do you mean?
well, because that was like when the Jedi Order really started to step up. Like Luke had been, the like, let's just wait and see, let's just wait and see. And then when they start like, killing Jedi, the Peace Brigade, and especially like the Voxen mission, like that, I felt like that was when the Jedi Order as a whole really started like
It
actively
activated them,
fighting
yeah.
back. Yeah. And so it's
Hmm.
sort of like maybe if they hadn't, targeted the Jedi in that way, they never would have come to that, or at least at that point, come to that, like, everyone in agreement on what they need to do. It united them in a way, which
Yeah.
a lot of times that kind of, oh, we all have death sentences. Oh, well,
Yeah.
um, and then I think too, once they started to lose their like good strategists, then you're like, oh, this is the beginning of the end. Because it was like the Galactic Alliance was obviously like evolving and changing in response to the Valn, and the Valn just weren't doing it at that same speed. Because
Yeah.
again, they're like so entrenched and like so, they were a great warrior society once, but there's been a lot of decline over the years.
Yeah, as shaky as their society is, I think what ultimately spelled their doom in the beginning of this end, which is clearly in full display with Shimra, is the cult of personality.
Yeah.
Nomanor has it, Savon La had it, Supreme Overlord Shimra is like, it's me. Me.
Yeah.
I'm the spy. I'm the hot shit here. I make rules. I'm gonna take over. Savon La is like, ha, Jedi. Yes, it's me. I'm the big boss here. Like, you guys listen to me, all right? Shimra is like, no, I believe in gods. I don't believe in gods. I'm the one who makes all the final. It's just you were too fixated on different agendas instead of
Yeah.
just uniting. It's like, bro, let's just take this over, kill everybody here, and then we decide how we go about rebuilding our society. And they almost had all the full deck of cards, and they just didn't properly use it.
Yeah.
Let's wrap this first part of our discussion. Shimra's continued insane commands declare the war on the planet. Call to it and their gods' destruction to attain ultimate freedom from gods or from everyone, from fate itself. Furthermore, he undermines his own station and orders to kill all potential supreme overlords. Stalin. Talking about crazy.
Yeah.
The Galactic Alliance loses its veteran warrior. Admiral Jal Akbar passes from old age.
Yeah.
The military scores another crucial victory against the Kurulak planet, and it set its course on the final destination, Coruscant. Now it's destination Yuzantar. We're going there.
Yep.
It's a massive book. Did you feel like it needed to wrap its story up quicker?
I don't think so, because I mean, there's so much to cover that, like, when I saw how big it was, I was like, that makes sense. Like, I don't think James Luceno could have wrapped this up in less pages. If he did, it would have been even more of a frantic pace, and I think that would have hurt the book as a whole.
I completely agree. I don't think they should have went to the Harry Potter movie decision of splitting into two. Like, it's no, you're just prolonging it. You got to start wrapping things. One of the major rules of a film, when your heroes reach the climatic end, you got to wrap your story up and roll the credits as soon as possible. And that's what he's doing to the story as he's seeing it. It's like he has, we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of loose ends to tie over and finish up this grand finale and give you a very emotionally gratifying conclusion.
Yeah.
But you're on time schedule here. Don't, okay, if it's 1,000 pages, I don't care. I just know for a fact that not a lot of people have patience for that.
Yeah, I there are definitely people I know who see a big doorstopper and go, "Oh, I can't read a book that big." And you're like, it is a lot of pages, but the pace, it really depends on the pace. And I feel like the Unifying Force is so quick paced that, like, you don't notice those 1,000 pages.
That was my next question, actually. Did you ever feel like, in terms of speed, that some areas kind of were like dragging on a little bit too long, and you said, okay, I see where you're going with this, but let's speed things up? Was there ever a moment like that?
I don't really think so, because I feel like even the bits where I'm sort of like, like, there's five pages where Boba Fett shows up. When they were leaving the one planet and they're on that, like, docking station or whatever, and then they're attacked by these Evolved, and they see Boba Fett and a bunch of Mandalorians, and he and Han are basically like, hello?
Huh? Yeah.
And even that, where it'd be like, Boba Fett's here, but it's like 5 pages. And then, all of a sudden he's gone and you never see him again. So I don't think that anything really dragged for me, because I feel like even at times when I was wondering, like, the espionage stuff with Han and Leia, like, where are we going here? Once we get to, like, seeing Alpha Red deployed, you're like, oh, that's it. So, like, even at times when I questioned, like, is this too long? Once I saw why it was there, I was like, okay, no, I buy that.
Nice. See, with me, I never concern myself with how long or short the book is. I'm the sort of person who has, like, how do you say it? I'm very focused in what's happening at the moment. And if you have my attention through the detail in the scene or the type of dialogue that is at the same time character revealing, but still pushes the story forward, I don't care how quickly we get to the end. I'm not the type of person who tries to look at a story from a general perspective, or like kind of like zoomed out. I was like, oh, this is going to be a beginning, middle, and an end. Let's get to the end. I'm the very detail-oriented person. Like, even in my graphic design, I'm like, I could spend hours with a certain moment. And you know what's interesting? Certain things about the New Jedi Order, and I mean, you've reread it recently. I've read it as it was coming out. I've never read that series. A lot of those moments, like you just mentioned, Boba Fett and the Mandalorians having their moment there, and immediately sparked my imagination because I was so interested in just that one scene, which pertained to who the Mandalorians will be later on, but not yet. And you were still kind of fascinated. Oh my God, look at these badasses. They show for a couple of seconds. They have this really cool action scene, and then they just disappear.
Yeah.
For me, for somebody like me, if you have my attention for 15 seconds, I'm good. I could go for a 2,000-page book. What was your overall reaction to the first half of the book, like overall feelings, like where you're like breathing hard, like, oh my God, I can't take this, my head is spinning, or we're like, let's go there, let's go. Like I'm invested.
I think it was like, let's go, because I'm like, okay, it's going down. Like everyone is headed to Coruscant. There is gonna be a battle here, and I'm ready for it.
Yeah, I almost felt like the end of the Return of the King, right? The Peter
Yeah.
Jackson's Lord of the Rings, like for Frodo, and they just like all try like, oh my God, like, oh Jesus, what's going on? Yeah, it was definitely had that feeling to it. It's just James Luceno's testament to his talent. But how is his story choices different from other authors? He's great at handling many moving pieces, and did you feel he was effective at doing so?
I think so, because I feel like I never felt like I lost track of people. And I have done that before in other people, like other novels where, especially like fight scenes, all of a sudden you'll be like, well, wait a minute, where did ship A go? I haven't seen ship A in a while. And with James Luceno, I feel like, because I think he plans everything like so precisely that
Mm-hmm.
you never feel like, oh, well, wait a minute, well, what about so and so? Because it's like, and the way too he'll switch back and forth
Mm-hmm.
between scenes. Um, I feel like even if someone is dropped for a bit in the narrative, like I know where they are, and then when it comes back up, it's like, oh, there's Luke again. There's Onama Seacoat. I know what's happening. Yeah, I feel like, well, he worked to like help plot the whole series. So I feel like if anyone was to write the finishing book, it was Lucino, who seemed to have everything like figured out.
Yeah. And I think what also helps is the chapter length and structure and how you shift between your events effectively. Sometimes you could have three or four characters doing their separate things and you're confused, or you could have
Yeah.
James Luceno and a whole ensemble of characters and you're still on point. It's like, oh, yes, oh, we're back to the Nova Code. We're back. Like, for example, I'm reading the Dawn of the Jedi right now.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of adventuring, a lot of different planets, and a lot of interplay between, I don't know if you read it, between the past and present. But the author does it so effectively, and I'm like in my slow reading zone right now. I could read a chapter and pick up the second chapter a week from then. I feel lazy.
Right.
It's summertime. I don't know what it is, but you never feel lost. Like, oh yeah, I remember this. You could stop in the middle of a chapter, like, and it's just the author manages to direct your mind very effectively.
Mm.
While some key characters do die early on and throughout this series, a lot of them stick around until the very end, right? We still have Nomanor, we still have Lord Shimra. Did you ever feel that the series is playing it safe, or does it kill off its cast effectively as the story necessitates?
To a certain extent, like I felt like Chewie's death in Vector Prime was a bit of shock factor, where you're like, my heroes are safe, and then Chewie, goes out like a boss,
Yeah.
shaking his fist at the moon, and you're like, oh. But then since then, I feel like you reading the New Jedi Order series, you have the sense of like no one is safe. But then when people die, I feel like it doesn't feel senseless. Like the deaths we get make sense and are justified. And like some of them, like Anakin Solo, you're like sobbing on the floor, but you're
Mhm.
still like, I could see that coming. I understand it. It makes sense. So like going but then there are ones like Nen Yim in the Final Prophecy, where she's just starting to uncover something very important, and then that weasel Nominor. So
Yeah.
so I think it was like I felt like in the New Jedi Order, no one is safe. But then for the most part, most of the deaths we got, I felt like made sense within the
Yeah.
narrative. Yeah.
I think what was very well done is, at the end of the day, it's still, we're in capitalism. You still got to sell your story. The author is going to make their money, and you
Yeah.
got to go by what's popular, the tried formula that people stick with the popular characters, and you can't just kill them off.
No.
But I think what the New Jedi Order has done perfectly well is, first of all, you put through your major characters through a meat grinder. let's just talk about Jaina Solo, Tahiri Vela, and Jason Solo. Oh
Mm,
my God.
yeah.
And other minor characters, which you could make an argument serve almost like red shirts from Star Trek, they honestly never quite do. Because even when you have a character like those Jedi that were on this frozen planet that with the underwater sequence, where a couple of them die.
Oh yeah, like what was that? Miko
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Reglia?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
when they rescued Danny Kui. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. It's the scene would have the proper setup, make you care for that character, and
Yeah.
show you that their sacrifice means something. It's not like, oh no, by the way, humans are mortal. This guy's dead. Jedi to die too. By the way, you never feel that. It's never cheap. It's never just like to have a check mark. By the way, people die in our series, and the stuff that Jason and Jaina go through, it's almost like a near emotional death moment. I mean,
Yeah.
Jaina comes out on the other side of this work, entirely different person. She's a woman. She grows from a child, from a teenager into an adult over the span of
Yeah.
this war. Say with Jason, even more so. With Han, with obviously, right? We know what happens with Anakin, with Chewie and stuff. And it makes you kind of realize that you don't necessarily have to go Game of Thrones style and chop off your characters
No.
in order for you to care for them, to care for the
Yeah.
story. And the final question is, Meg, and as always, it's a pleasure having you. Can't wait till we get to the Legends series. What are you looking forward to discussing in the second half of the book that we didn't get to?
In the second half of the book, there are just so many like almost feels like the culmination of character arcs that are like so good. Like we finally see Mara versus Nominor, and that did not go how I expected. We have Luke and Jason and Jaina versus Shimra and his forces, and it's like epic.
Yeah.
It's just like, yeah, I have like the culmination of 18 books of buildup is just really good.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the testament of this series, but also to the expanded universe, which lasted for 40 plus years, developing these rich stories and characters that live with us. You almost feel like you went on this grand journey with all these friends that you have
Yeah.
for a while, and you're like, oh my God, and you have this. And to me, I can't wait that we get to this just one scene I remember towards the very end. Spoiler, we are talking about spoilers of the story, where it's over, and the humans and the Vongs are coming out on the streets of Coruscant. And there's a beautiful painting by Ralph McQuarrie where he visualizes Coruscant, I believe, in preparation to the prequel trilogy. I don't know if you've seen those paintings or not, where you see like broad landscapes and a lot of flat areas, not dominated by like large areas, but just a lot of public squares. And I almost had that vision where these two people who are very like tribal and against each other coming out, and the sky is blue and it's shining, and you just breathe out. As like, it was such a uplifting scene, such a memorable, throughout the years I still remember that scene, that
Yeah.
you see these two enemies coming together. Like, it's almost like the conclusion to the Mass Effect series. I don't know if you're ever familiar with that franchise, where the ultimate mortal enemies come together at the end and they reach some sort of symbiosis. And I'm like, wow, I did not expect it. I thought one side of it is just going to crash and burn and it's just going to be the Jedi victorious. I liked it. I love the humanity that this series brought into it.
Yeah.
Well, guys, it's been a fun half of the discussion, which we wanted to conclude it today, but we will conclude hopefully by next week. Please go out and check out Meg's channel, who does absolutely wonderful reviews. I think she's one of the coolest people in the Star Wars YouTube community. It's not about how many followers you have. It's just the content that you have and the passion and love that you share for this book. Guys, I encourage you to go check out her channel. All the links will be in the description below. Thanks so much for checking us out. We'll see you next week, guys.